Welcome to another episode of Insights from the Trenches, a series dedicated to helping ADHD couples thrive by empowering couples with insights from ADHD experts and ADHD peers. I'm Alice, your host. In today's episode, I'm excited to talk with Rachel Ban, a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in working with couples affected by ADHD. Through her private practice, and as program director for Melissa Orloff's Intent to Action membership program, Rachel helps partners navigate challenges and build lasting connection. So grab a cup of coffee and let's thrive together.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to see you today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Rachel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a couples specialist, and my subspecialty is with ADHD impacted couples. I consider myself a recovering overfunctioner in a ADHD relationship dynamic. My kid's dad has ADHD, and so I'm still the non-ADHD partner in a co-parenting setup now, and a mom to two kids who have ADHD, one more hyperactive type, one more inattentive type. So two really different ADHD kids.
Great. And just for people who have never heard about intensive ADHD couples therapy, what exactly is it and how is it different from standard couples therapy?
Yeah, good question. So, intensive couples therapy for couples with ADHD relationship dynamics is basically just a really long session or a series of sessions strung together. So, different therapists will do it differently, but my structure is I do 15 hours over 3 days. Which would take you like 3.5 months to get through if you were doing hourly, weekly sessions. So it just amounts to a lot more progress and a lot more productivity in that amount of time, because you're not starting and stopping and getting settled and then closing. You're really just able to have a focused conversation and body of work, and then to build in breaks where it makes sense that, to help us regulate, to help the couple get some downtime. And I really pace it so that folks don't feel like it's a slog or just 15 hours of therapy all at the same time. People reliably tell me that it really feels productive and doesn't feel like as intense as they thought it would.
What led you begin to offer and advocate for this type of therapy?
Yeah. So as part of my couples specialty, as I was getting a lot of training in couples work and a lot of supervision and consultation, I was doing a lot of intensives for couples, all couples in my clinical practice. And I just saw how incredibly effective and efficient they could be. And then once I started to learn about ADHD relationship dynamics, I wanted to see, I had a question mark in my mind of like, would this work well for a couple with ADHD relationship dynamics? Is it going to be too much time? Is it too intensive? Is it better to start and stop? Is it better to have one long flow of work? And it became clear immediately to me when I started working with ADHD impacted couples that the here and now focus that helps bring everything into the now rather than the not now, which is a common kind of time orientation for folks with ADHD, the now, not now brain. The here and now focus of the intensive really allows really productive work to be done. And there's a lot of structure. And so clients didn't have to wait months and years to feel better, which I think also really helped the ADHD impacted couple, because the non-ADHD partner was really eager for some relief and to feel some change. The ADHD partners were feeling like they wanted to be able to show up in a way that they felt like they could be their best self. And the intensive process is just really spacious for that. So that is where my love of doing this intensive structure with ADHD impacted couples came in.
15 hours over 3 days seems like a very long slug, especially when partners, our non-ADHD partners, can't keep our ADHD partners' attention for more than 15 to 30 minutes. How do you get them to be focused for 15 hours over 3 days?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it really has to do with the structure. Like the structure kind of brings us all to the table and we know what we're there to work on. It's also the models that I'm trained in and that I focus my work in capitalize on what's called state dependent learning so that we're not just slogging through heavy feelings the whole time, where I'm actually working on giving the couple tools and skills and strategies that they practice in the room with me so that they can remember it more easily when they go home to and have a conversation over their kitchen table. It's not like they have to remember, what did Rachel tell us to do, or what was the thing I was going to do differently. It's like it becomes in your body and in your nervous system, literally, when you're practicing it in the session. So it's dynamic. It's I'm responding to what's happening in the moment very intentionally, and the longer time frame actually more closely mimics what couples are doing at home in terms of having conversations and trying to figure out what's the order of operations here, how can we get to something different. And it really helps me help the ADHD partners be seen for who they are and not just for their ADHD, and finding ways to engage that they can sustain. It helps me help the non-ADHD partners notice when they're over functioning or when their resentment is leading or they're really depleted, and give them tools to use addressing whatever the thing is in the moment.
Thanks for sharing, because it's good to hear that you can keep the ADHD partner engaged, because sometimes these are the hard things to keep them engaged. And I see that you
Mhm.
talk about some methodologies in terms of doing that. So Rachel, what is state dependent learning for the listeners who don't know what it is?
Yeah, that's not a common term that we just toss around. So state dependent learning has to do with learning something in the state that you will then utilize it in. So what that means in the context of intensive couples therapy is that we're not just talking about the fight that you had last week and going over the details and trying to figure out who was right and who was wrong, or what you really said or what you didn't really say. I'm actually not interested in most of that stuff. What we're doing in state dependent learning is working on the skills that people are needing for conflict while they're trying to navigate conflict. So what that actually looks like is in the second and third day of the intensive, after I've done the assessment that I do on the first day, we're talking about the hard stuff. And rather than the couple talking exclusively to me, there's definitely some talking to me and me, stepping in to help. I'm having a couple talk to each other and work on whatever the thing is that we determine together we're working on. And I'm having them do it differently than they do it at home. And it's not so differently that it feels artificial or awkward. I mean, sure, for the first minute or two, people are like, what do you want me to do, Rachel? But my hope is really, and where I like to get people to, is a place where it feels like they're organically talking with some more structure and my guidance, so that again they're in that state that they would be in their kitchen talking about stuff, but they're doing it differently, so that then when they go home they'll have access to it when it comes up again, it or any other topic that sort of creates that level of stress or conflict.
Got it. So it's kind of like a new way of communicating,
That's
because
right.
obviously the way that they came before the session is probably not working, and you teaching them new skills, and then they will just practice when they get home to create a different outcome
That's
that's more positive for them.
Exactly. Yeah, I meet with a lot of people who have been through 2 or 3 or 4 rounds of couples therapy and found it exhausting, and sometimes like makes their dynamic worse. And usually that's couples therapy where you're having the same fight at home in front of the therapist, and the therapist is sort of trying to mediate but isn't really helping you do anything differently. And that's super painful. I've actually been in couples therapy like that. That's really not helpful. This is really different. We're tackling the things head on, but we're doing it differently so that you have something new to bring the next time it comes up.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because I do feel that couples therapy sometimes is a lot about mediating. So I'm glad to hear trying to help you do something differently. So
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's my training and my approach for all couples, and that is good couples therapy. I have a little bit of a bias towards what good couples therapy looks like, but doubly so, like you're saying, for couples with ADHD relationship dynamics, they don't need to feel their distress, full stop, right? They need to feel their distress enough for somebody to get it and help them to find something different, because it's been a whole lot of rinse, wash, repeat. Or wash,
right.
rinse, repeat. The other way around.
Help us understand, why might an ADHD couple benefit from an intensive model like this?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think it really is the state dependent learning. If somebody's really having trouble focusing in an intensive, like they're just spent, which happens to all of us, right? With, whether we have ADHD or not, there comes a point where we're a little saturated. That's part of the learning, is like, okay, let's help each other notice when your partner's saturated, and then practice taking breaks and coming back to it. We have the luxury of time in an intensive. So if we're hitting a wall, or someone's flooded, or someone's losing focus, for all these reasons, it's actually really pertinent to knowing how to do conflict well together, to be able to name you need a break, or to offer a break to your partner, and then to come back and pick back up in a productive way. So because we have the luxury of time, we can kind of dip in and out based on people's states and get really productive.
That's good to know. So help me understand, when do ADHD couples benefit the most in the intensive model?
Yeah. So I think couples would benefit from a couples intensive at lots of different stages of navigating ADHD relationship dynamics. So whether it's a couple first understanding that one or both of them is diagnosed with ADHD, and trying to figure out, like, whoa, what about all that hurt from the past? How do we heal that? And then how do we do things differently going forward? That is one phase that folks come to me. Another phase is where one person's ready to go, and they come to see me as like a Hail Mary last ditch. Let's see if we can get back on track. I don't really want to leave, but I can't stay like this. And I think, the most common presentation, regardless of kind of where folks are in time, is just a lot of depletion, a lot of like ingrained dynamics, a lot of unproductive conflict, and people really needing some help to do things differently, to feel a change in their relationship, and not just to do like a deep emotional excavation. That's not to say we don't do emotions in an intensive, we certainly do, but what I'm interested in is, like, can we figure out what the emotions are, what the needs are, and give you a skill or a strategy or a tool that you can practice with me, so that you can really start to feel things shifting.
Got it. And do you do these intensive in person or virtually?
Both. Both. So I have an office where I see folks in person. And during COVID, I was actually the first, I was working at a couples therapy center, and I was the first one to start doing virtual intensives, and have honed a little bit of a framework that lends itself well to the virtual iteration. And those work really well too.
So let's talk about, what are the top three things and patterns that shows up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So certainly the parent-child dynamic, or one other way that I language it is, one person's over functioning, taking on more of a role, and feeling anxious and stressed and resentful and frustrated because of that. And one person's under functioning, doing less than they may be really capable of, and feeling kind of less than, or like they can never do it good enough. That is very, 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 very common. The symptom response dynamic, where there's an ADHD symptom that the ADHDer presents, like say some time blindness and being late to something, and then the non-ADHD partner responds to that because that's frustrating, or creates some kind of chaos, and then the ADHD partner in turn responds feeling defensive or bad or ashamed, and so there's just a conflict dance there. So we're really attending with symptom response, trying to figure out like what would the ideal switch be and how do you get there. And that can range from how to work with accountability for symptoms for the ADHD partner, how to work with frustration and resentment for the non-ADHD partner, how to slow the whole process down and have a more constructive conversation. So that's the second one. And I would say the third one is probably taking ADHD symptoms personally. So say an ADHD, I'm thinking about like a couple that I worked with in March that came in to see me, and the non-ADHD partner, the wife, just really felt ignored and missed when her ADHD partner would come into the room and just sort of start talking about kind of mid-thought stream, whatever was on his mind. And he was so excited to engage with her and really glad to be like in the room with her, and she was in the middle of whatever she was in the middle of and feeling interrupted and unseen. And it had happened enough that she really felt like, you don't care about me, you don't even see me. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. He loved her very much and really was excited to engage with her, but because he was missing her state, her where she was, that she didn't feel that. And so that can be some of the work, is how can we notice when it's an ADHD symptom, again work in some tools or skills or accountability around that, and then help the non-ADHD partner advocate for themselves in a way that doesn't feel like they're just sort of shouting into the void.
Good to know. And that is perfect. That leads into my next question, because like you have mentioned earlier, many non-ADHD partners come to your intensive therapy feeling very depleted already. So
Mhm.
how does the intensive format really help them feel seen, supported, and even reconnect to hope again that they
Yeah.
will thrive in their relationship?
Yeah, that's such a big one, and very much the goal for the non-ADHD partners. The word that comes to mind when I think of the non-ADHD partners, which again I can really relate to in my own experience, is relief, right? These are folks who are working so hard to keep it together, to track things, to manage things. And so the feedback I get from a lot of the non-ADHD partners that I work with in couples is that it's just like on the base level, it's a relief to know that I'm in it with them and seeing what they're seeing, and holding the dynamic with them and working with their partner so that they're not feeling so alone in carrying it all, and helping them work with like what is happening for you when you step in and overfunction, and what happens for you when you do, what happens for you when you don't. No judgment, just like how can I help the ADHD partner get to a place where they can breathe more deeply and feel more comfortable just in their home and in their life. One example I have is a couple that I really, really adore. I've worked with for probably about a year and a half now through an intensive and then follow-up mini intensives. And this lovely non-ADHD partner will often into teaching her husband, her ADHD husband, or guiding him, like really without even consciously realizing it. She's, quickly doing the calculus of like what he's getting and what needs to be gotten, and then trying to walk him through to having the full understanding or seeing the full picture. And so she's holding a lot of vigilance, 3 young kids, right? A lot of work there. And so when we can notice that in session, like it's such a relief for her to know like, oh, I don't have to do the thing I do all day long, and I can support her with what's up for her there. And then actually the great thing about couples work, and part of why I love it, is then her husband can see, oh, that was a moment she was doing the thing that I thought that was just how we interacted so much of the time. I actually don't want you to do that thing, because he's, not seeing how fast her, like the duck with the their little feet under the water paddling so fast. He often doesn't see that because he's trying to make sure he's catching everything he needs to catch. And so, in the session, then I can work with him about like, how can you notice what else needs to be captured? What are your questions? Let's make space for you here to kind of own some of this too. So, yeah, so it's very individualized to the person, but I would say the big goal is really building in relief so that the non-ADHD partner, for their side of things can feel like they don't have to carry such a heavy load.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that because a lot of non-ADHD partners, without the proper education, they don't know how fast they can think through in terms of getting something done. So something as simple as going to the grocery store could be very difficult and challenging for the
Mm,
ADHD partners. That's where helping them see that is very important because then you can find solutions to help them step back a little bit
mm.
from like understand what they're really asking their partner to do.
Yeah.
Because for a non-ADHD partner, going to the store might be just picking up the car keys, getting in the car, driving it, and picking up all the stuff. But
Mhm.
for an ADHD partner, it is a lot more than that. It
Yeah.
has to deal with traffic. They're overly stimulated when they're driving, or when they get to the shop, they get distracted and
Mm,
buy a whole bunch of other stuff and not returning on the
exactly.
items that you want. So that is a very important one to
Yeah.
really come through.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Alice, that like many of us come to over functioning earnestly. In other words, like I think about my growing up, I learned how to over function before I could ride a bike, right? Before I could drive a car. So like that is so deep in us of what does it feel like to be tracking the needs and responding to the needs, and we get self-esteem from that, and we get a sense of maybe control or maybe keeping things calm, right? There's a real benefit to over functioning in some ways. Similarly to over function or under functioning rather, people learn that early too. So these patterns can be really hard to undo, but the distress people feel when they're carrying, kids and a household and a job and all the things and really do need to set something down for their health and well-being because it feels so intense. And then the other thing I would just add is that I'm also really here for the ADHD partner to also be reconnected to hope, because I think it's a particularly painful and lonely place for ADHD partners who feel sort of helpless in the dynamic, even though they're not, which is part of the work that I'm doing often with ADHD partners, is helping them to see where their volition is, and that, we live in a neurotypical world. The expectations are that people function in neurotypical ways. And if that's not how your brain works, then that is really overwhelming and really stressful in invisible ways. And so, my hope is that being in the couples intensive space with me allows people to feel more seen, again, less alone, and more like they have access to resources that will help shift things. And actually, a client that I think I started working with this last summer comes to mind, who was incredibly depressed and pretty grumpy and irritable and angry in his depression. This is the ADHD partner, and really not feeling super hopeful coming into the intensive with me. His wife pretty much brought him to the intensive. And by talking to him, I was able to sort of get into like what it was that was feeling so painful, is that he wasn't feeling like he could function in the ways that his wife and his kids would have wanted him to. And so we started with the depression. And now, what is it, like 8 months later, after my starting with him and he started medication, he's riding his bike again. He's laughing with his kid and teaching his kid to drive. He's able to access the best in himself more, and that's having downstream effects on his connection with his wife too. And so, sometimes it's about like understanding, what are we really looking at here, and what's the best thing to help get somebody feeling more like themselves again.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that because it's important to know both partners are going to get something out of the therapy, the intensive couples therapy, and you're there to make them both successful, not
That's
one
right.
partner.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
let's talk about what makes those changes stick after therapy ends, because this is like the $100 million question.
For
After
sure.
your intensive, you are practicing and finding strategies. How do you make sure that all the changes sticks
That's
after therapy?
the $1 million question. So, I mean, first I'll say I have focused my couples therapy training and supervision and reading and research on like what makes the work stick in general. And so that I apply kind of doubly to folks with ADHD couples dynamics. So the first is that it should be therapy that focuses on state-dependent learning. So therapy that is either very therapist dependent or very like intellectualized, like based on your thoughts and your feelings, doesn't necessarily stick. We need things to be in our nervous systems and in our bodies. And that's where state-dependent learning comes in. Folks talk about state-dependent learning when like studying for tests. I'm talking about state-dependent learning in the therapy session that you then can take home with you so that you're not feeling that you've wasted all these hours in therapy and then don't really have changes happen at home. So the whole structure and model of the therapy matters. And then it's what you do after. So at the end of the intensives, I give every couple a personalized aftercare plan, which is basically like my therapist wish list. Like if I could wave a magic wand and you would be able to enact these 5 to 10 things at home, you would be golden. Knowing that most couples will do 1 or 2, but I want to give them a menu of choices. And so that may be things from practice, having conflict conversations, using this tool that I gave you, or practice repair using this tool that I worked on with you, or read this book, or use this worksheet for compromise. And then I do regular follow-ups with folks. So I do mini intensives, which are 3 hours each, every 2 to 6 weeks, depending on people's level of acuity and availability. And then in those mini intensives, we are refining their approach to conflict. We are taking on new skills as they've mastered the ones that we've done before. So again, still keeping in mind the state-dependent learning in the mini intensives, but giving people a chance to go home and practice in between.
How can we get a hold of you if one of the listener wants to work with you?
Sure, yeah. So I have a website, which is the best way to find me. It's www.rachelban, RACHELBAN, LICSW.com. So rachelban.licsw.com. And folks can also find me through Melissa's website, through the Intent to Action membership program. Melissa's website is ADHDandmarriage.com. And there's a bar right at the top for Intent to Action.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. Appreciate your time today.
It's been a pleasure, Alice. Always nice to talk to you.